The Lennon Series, with Jude Southerland Kessler, featuring Should Have Been There and Shivering Inside.
So Stu, at one point in the winter of 1962, he's gone away to Hamburg, he's fallen in love, he's living in Hamburg, he comes back to Liverpool and he's wearing this tight, short, pocketless suit. And everybody's making fun of Stu and laughing at him, asking him if he's wearing his sister's clothes. Well, Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, sees that suit and he says, I love that, and that's what the Beatles are going to wear. And he gets a tailor to design the suits that become the famous Beatles suits, and it's Stu Sutcliffe's design. At one point, Paul and John, for John's 21st birthday, go away to Paris. And on the way home from Paris, they come in via London to Liverpool, and they stop by a store that has these high-heeled Cuban boots in the window. And they come back to Liverpool with these high-heeled Cuban boots, and that becomes the Beatle boot. Now, for years, George Harrison had worn what they call in Liverpool a winkle picker boot, and I'll tell you, at one point, I didn't know the name of that shoe. I wasn't sure. So I wrote to someone in Liverpool and I said, is that shoe called a winkle picker or a winkle pecker? And they wrote back to me and said, let me assure you, it is not a winkle pecker. It is a winkle picker. But it was a pointed toe boot. So now you have this boot with this high heel and this pointed toe. And look, that was huge. Everybody in the 1960s had to have 16 pairs, you know. They changed fashion. The haircut, that Prince Albert or bowl cut. Stu's girlfriend, Astrid, cut Stu's hair that way. And pretty soon John cut his hair that way. And the rest is history. And every band in the world, the Dave Clark Five, the Monkees, I mean, you go on down through everybody in the 1960s, they all copied the haircut. George Harrison was known for colored shirts. In fact, John's Aunt Mimi, the stern disciplinarian, she didn't want John to hang around with George because he wore colored shirts. She said he was a bad influence. But you start looking at what happens after the Beatles come into play. In the 1950s, there had been Bobby Darin and Bobby Rydell and Paul Anka, all with their white, crisp shirts and their ties. Now you start to get color and paisley and psychedelic, and the Beatles led that movement, bringing color into men's fashion. And then later, after they go to India, they come back with Nehru jackets and shoulder-length hair and goatees. And as the Beatles changed, the world changed. And that's just fashion. You know, you think about John, he needed glasses. And when he's a teenager, he wears Buddy Holly glasses because that's what's cool. But later, he goes for the National Health prescribed glasses. And those are those little round granny glasses. And look, we call them today John Lennon glasses. You know, I mean, it was everything they did became the thing to do. Okay, how did they change music? And this may be a separate question, but let's just take some. These are just some of the things that they did. Before the Beatles, if you were a band, you performed in a theater or a dance hall. After the Beatles, you perform in stadiums. That's huge. You know, you go outside, you get huge crowds. When I saw Paul McCartney, there were like 65,000 people there. You can't do that inside a theater. You have to go to a football stadium. They were the first ones to quit touring and to substitute music videos. Now, I know somebody watching this is going to go, oh, no. Elvis had videos because he did Jailhouse Rock. But that's not true because that's a movie, and that was a segment of a movie. The Beatles were the first to say, let's make a video to sell our song. And, of course, now we have VH1 and MTV and every other station that we have showing videos, you know, their concept. They were the first one to make a video to promote an album. When they did Magical Mystery Tour, Paul's idea was to have them get a bus, put people on the bus, drive around the country and make a movie of it, and that was how they would promote their album. And, you know, everybody does that now. It's a huge thing. First double album. First album to print the lyrics. First use of distortion as music. If you listen to I Feel Fine, John's using feedback as the opening of the song. Hendrix, you know, picks this up later. And if you listen to the backwards vocals in the song Rain, It's the first time that someone recorded a vocal, played it backwards, and used it as part of music. Using an orchestra. Now, Buddy Holly had used strings on True Love Ways, but the Beatles bring a whole orchestra into the Abbey Road studios to do A Day in the Life. They use horns. I've got to get you into my life. I mean, you could just go on and on and on. But if I had to say one thing that they did that really changed history, every band of the 1950s had a leader and then backup guys. Every group in Liverpool had it. Derry and the Singers. They were always one person and backups. And when Alan Williams, their first manager, came to John and said, I want you guys to be Long John Silver and the whatever, John said, it ain't happening. You know, there's no way I'm going to stand out from this group. We're all the same. We're all one. We're a group. And they became just the Beatles. And after that, you have the Animals, the Yardbirds, skip to today. I mean, it's Green Day, it's Evanescence. You never have somebody and the backup singers. And that was all them. That was John's insistence that they were going to be a unit, one. And they elevate Ringo up on a podium so you can see the drummer, because the drummer's just as important as the lead guitarist, as the bass player, because they're a group, they're one. And that's, in music, that changed history. He's asking what was the catalyst that made the Beatles famous in the United States. Well, a couple of things. First, Brian Epstein's relentless pursuit of an American recording label. EMI and Capitol Records are linked, and Capitol was not one bit interested in their first records. George Martin tried to get them to listen to the records, tried to get them interested, tried to help the Beatles break into the American market, but they said, no, this isn't going to sell over here. So Brian kept pursuing smaller labels, anything that would get his boys a listen. Swan Records, Philadelphia-based companies rather than Los Angeles-based companies, gave them a listen and said, you know what, I think these guys are going to be fantastic. And they went ahead and recorded them on these smaller labels. There was a young man named Sid Bernstein who was over in England, and he was doing some research over there, and he happened to see Beatles, 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 Beatles all over the newspapers. So he came back to America, and on a whim, on a bet, he booked Carnegie Hall for the Beatles 1 year from that day, saying by the time that this year passes, in 365 days, these boys are going to be the toppermost of the toppermost here in America. And sure enough, they were. And his name was Sid Bernstein. And he's still alive and still going to Beatles festivals and talking to people and telling his story. And he's a wonderful man, and I wouldn't be surprised if he wouldn't talk to you, because he's just that nice. But what a story he has to tell, you know, I mean, of just knowing that they were going to be great. You know, I don't know how much truth there is to this, but as you probably know, on the 22nd of November, 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And I was in elementary school. I remember them bringing the television, rolling a television on a cart into our classroom, and how depressed and sad. All the teachers were crying. Everybody was crying. Our president had been killed. All through December, this whole country was in mourning. But I remember going to school one Thursday morning in December, and a friend named Patty Singer, and if you're out there, Patty Singer, I've been looking for you for years, came up to me and she said, look at this 45. These are the Beatles. Everybody's fallen in love with them. You have until the end of recess to pick one to fall in love with. I was like, what? And she said, yeah, you can look at it until after recess, and then you have to tell me who you're in love with. Well, I picked George Harrison because, I don't know, I just thought that he was quirky looking. But I took the 45 home with me that night and listened to it and looked at it and came back the next day and said, I'm changing my mind. I'm picking this guy right here, who was John Lennon. And she said, oh, yeah, that figures. He's the smart Beatle.